please know that you can contact the LOC lobbyists directly. For LOC lobbyists who are already on, if you haven't already done so, can you please make sure your name and contact information is in the chat before we leave so people know how to reach you. We will end the webinar promptly at 1 o'clock today. We're going to try and hold tight to that deadline. And then if you don't get what the information you need specifically, please remember that you can track all of our legislative efforts on the LOC website at www.orcities.org. And there will be additional information in today's bulletin, which, if it's not already released yet, should be coming out within the next hour or so. For today's webinar, we're specifically going to touch on the following topics: cybersecurity, an initial 60-day package from the legislature to address homelessness, an Oregon housing needs analysis, enterprise zones and industrial site readiness, and we'll finish with an update on a potential semiconductor package. So we're going to jump right into it today, and we'll start off with an update from LOC lobbyist Nolan Plesha on cybersecurity. Specifically, Nolan's going to give you an update on House Bill 2049, which will establish the Oregon Cybersecurity Center for Excellence. Nolan is the LOC lobbyist who manages the cybersecurity, telecommunications, broadband, cable, energy, and environment portfolios. So Nolan, what exactly is it that our members need to know about House Bill 2049 today?
Thank you, Patty. So as you all know, local governments are attractive targets for cyber criminals. House Bill 2049 is a chance to create systems to support our needs and build the cyber workforce of the future. Quick note, House Bill 2049 is scheduled for its first public hearing on this next Wednesday, February 22nd, in the Joint Committee on Information Management and Technology. They have held 2 informational hearings so far. LOC has testified in one, along with Don Russ from the city of Glendale, to provide their story to the committee. We've also created a one-pager and are leading that effort for the bill, and we are actively collecting logos in support. So if your city would like to support House Bill 2049, please send your logos to me by 5 p.m. this coming Monday, February 20th, to be added and submitted before the first public hearing. And we will continue to accept logos and add them for the future hearings as well. So please keep them coming, even if you don't get them to us by Monday. So a quick background. The LOC has led a work group with Representative Nancy Nathanson and committee staff that was first convened back in 2021 and is now grown to include over 80 organizations to address the cybersecurity challenges faced by local governments, special districts, schools, etc. This has culminated in House Bill 4155 in 2022. Unfortunately, due to limited time, it did not pass that session. The work group continued to meet over 2022 and is now created House Bill 2049. So the problem, many cities operate under financial constraints, sometimes severe ones, that limit their ability to acquire and implement best practices surrounding cybersecurity technology and policies. Furthermore, many cities are operating on outdated or legacy systems. Through varying departments and critical public infrastructures, cities access and store considerable amounts of sensitive information, such as addresses, driver's license numbers, credit card numbers, social security numbers, and medical information, stuff that all of you probably know. So to the solution, cities need funding, technical assistance, support, goods and services, and education to meet the ongoing challenges of cyber threats. House Bill 2049 would address these needs for cities, along with broader systemic problems facing the state of Oregon when it comes to cybersecurity. I won't dive into all the details here of the bill because you can read that in today's bulletin and attach the attached one-pager for that bulletin that will be posted here shortly. However, there are a few quick points I do want to make. First, the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence creates a pipeline for cybersecurity workforce that benefit local governments and the private sector. Through the leadership of Oregon State University, Portland State University, and the University of Oregon, they will provide technical expertise to local governments through a teaching hospital model as students gain hands-on cybersecurity experience and prepare for potential roles in the public or private sectors after graduation. In addition, the center and the Cybersecurity Grant Program Fund allows funds to be used by public bodies for cybersecurity assessment, monitoring, incident response, and any technical assistance or other cybersecurity related goods and services that are needed. Growing this workforce is critical to sustaining this work on the long term, and we need to start that work now. I also want to point out one other thing that I think is critically important. House Bill 2049 creates a potential source of matching funds for the state to maximize federal funding from the state and local cybersecurity grant program that was created through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Under that grant program, the state will be required to pass on 80% of those funds to local governments. While that particular funding cannot be used for the center's purposes, federal legislation requires that the state provide 10% matching funds to receive the federal funding. House Bill 2049 would create a location where the state funds or other sources of funding can reside that may be used as a match for the federal program. The Cybersecurity Center of Excellence and the revised Oregon Cybersecurity Advisory Council will bring together sectors to work together on cybersecurity issues they are facing. This is why I believe we need to pass House Bill 2049 and would welcome any city's logo to add to our growing one-pager. Please send those to me at nplesha@orcities.org by the end of the day on Monday, February 20th. I'll make sure to put that in the chat as well, and I believe I already did so. But thank you all so much, and later on, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Nolan. Is there a dollar amount that they're talking about giving to the center yet, or is that still being debated?
That is still being debated.
Okay.
I think if I can find it real quickly, last year for the 21 and 23 biennium, it was about 6.5 million. For the 23-25 biennium, it's around 14 million. So I assume it's going to be relatively the same, but that's something that LFO and Representative Nathanson are currently in conversation about.
And for a quick reminder for those who may not know the acronym LFO is?
That's the Legislative Fiscal Office, and they are in charge of helping to figure out the budgets.
And just to make sure that the money, once it gets to the center, theoretically, it's available for cities to use. They can apply for grants for their own needs. Is that right?
So there are a couple different programs. There's a Workforce Development Grant Fund. There's the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence Fund that's going to be used to help run the center. That will also be used for helping to do assessments, the monitoring, and things like that. They would actually be able to just work directly. They only have to apply for grants for those. They would just be able to connect and work directly with the center on these programs. So that way you're not actually having to go get out a grant and go and try to hire your own individuals to do this work. That's what the center is going to be there for.
Excellent. Thank you, Nolan. And just to restate, if you're interested in supporting, Nolan's email address is in the chat, and he would like your city's logo by Monday, if possible. And a final reminder, we will take questions at the end. So we're going to switch gears now, and we're going to move over to Ariel Nelson. Ariel is our lobbyist who handles our housing, land use, and homelessness portfolio. And I believe, Ariel, you've got an update on a potential 60-day package related to homelessness.
That's right. Thanks, Patty, and hello, everyone. So the legislature has been working on a number of short-term initiatives, and on the housing front, they're working on what's intended to be a bipartisan, bicamerally supported what's known as a 60-day housing package. So this would be a bill that would move out in early to mid-March, marking 60 days the legislature has been in session. And that means that we're seeing some movement in the House Housing Committee where some of this conversation has started. They're looking to move some legislation out next Thursday. And the main vehicle for that is House Bill 2001. There's currently a -1 amendments posted that contain most of the negotiated package. Included in there is some funding specifically for youth homelessness programs, funding for modular housing development, funding for some pre-development resources for affordable housing. And there's a couple policy pieces, most notably for the LOC. We were very pleased to see some language that recognizes the governor's emergency declaration on homelessness, but extends that declaration to the full state. So that's really important for our the 157 cities and 26 counties that were part of the balance of state that were excluded from the governor's executive order. So a piece that is a negotiated compromise between tenant advocates and landlords would continue for folks who receive court judicial eviction notices, giving them a little bit more time to make rent payments if they're receiving state assistance. So that is in there as well. Which is in House Bill 2001. We expect this bill again to move out on Thursday, where it will go to the Ways and Means Budget Committee. And there we're going to see the key funding to go with that. So the governor had proposed a $130 million package to support her emergency order. We expect that this is all, happening in negotiations, changes every day, but we expect to see that 130 million included in the legislative package, with an additional 25 million specifically for the balance of state and the rest of state that had not been included.
Hey, Ariel, I think you're cutting in and out. If you shut your video off, do you mind?
Okay, I'll try that. Yeah, sorry about that. I might be a little far from my computer too.
And maybe just repeat some of the highlights. I think we missed some of it.
Sorry about that. So I was speaking of the budget package for housing. We expect to see the legislature approve $130 million to support the governor's emergency order, with an additional, on top of that, $25 million that would be available to the rest of the state that she did not include in her order. My understanding at this point is that funding will go to the housing agency.
You're still cutting out, Ariel.
Housing and Community Services, the LSC.
Hey, Ariel, you're still cutting out. Can I pause you and ask you to kind of call back in, and we'll skip to somebody else and finish up with you instead of the semiconductor package? Because I can see people are interested in the topic. Is that possible?
I'm sorry, I must be breaking up.
It's okay, Ariel. If you can just hang up and call back in through a different way, we'll come back to you at the end. Okay. I'm going to pivot and I'm going to come over to Lindsay. Lindsay, if you're on, I know it's a little earlier than you had planned. But I'll pivot to Lindsay for an update on enterprise zones and industrial site readiness, and we'll just come back to Ariel at the end and see if we can get a better connection then. But Ariel, Lindsay, it's my understanding that we have an update on some sunset provisions possibly being extended for some of our main economic development tools. And if you can give us an update on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. Lindsay Tennis. I'm the tax, finance, and economic development lobbyist. So no policy updates, really. This is more of a call to action update on some public hearings that are happening this week, with an asterisk that the agenda for this committee hasn't been released yet. We have gotten a good signal that they are going to be scheduled for this Thursday. And this is in the bulletin as well. So all of the, information, how to sign up for testimony will be in there. And it may be that those agendas get posted while we're on the call. So if that happens, I will drop them in the link. But this Thursday, the 23rd, in House Economic Development Committee, there should be 3 hearings that pertain to LOC priorities. So one more hearing to extend the sunset for the enterprise zone program, and then 2 hearings on industrial site readiness. One of those bills is actually introduced at the request of the City of Wilsonville. And I think you heard this before from me on a call asking you guys to show up for an enterprise zone hearing. So I guess I'll explain a little bit about how these bills are introduced. There are multiple vehicles for enterprise zone extensions and rural enterprise zone extensions in different committees in the legislature. Sometimes there's a House version, sometimes there's a Senate version. And then there's multiple legislators who will introduce these sunset extensions if it's important to them and their communities. So as these hearings come up, we're going to keep asking you guys to show up, because it might be being heard in a different committee with different legislators that haven't heard about these programs yet. So even if you submitted testimony or testified on the same program before, we would love for you to do the same again, because again, it's just the more support that we can show to a different group, and power in numbers. So that's kind of why we're asking you to testify on the same bills or the same programs again. So in case that is at all confusing. So yeah, House Bill 2199, and again, this will all be in the bulletin, is to extend the sunset for the enterprise zone program. And then House Bill 2663 is for industrial site readiness, and 2258. And then each allocates a different pot of money to fund that program, which is key and something the LOC has been pushing for, is a funding source for that industrial site readiness. So again, all the information will be in the bullet. I'm going to drop my email in the chat. And then I also have a template for enterprise zone extension for written testimony. So you can email me if you want that template and I'll send it to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Lindsay. And in addition, I think you did it last time, but in case there's new people on the call today, can you also give them the link in the chat to how to provide testimony remotely so they don't have to go searching for it?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I think Lindsay introduced herself and I forgot with the pivot, but Lindsay does handle our tax and finance portfolio. So if you have any issues related to that aren't specific to these economic development tools, you can contact her as well. So pivoting away from Lindsay specifically, but still sticking with economic development, Jim, I'm going to come to you to give us an update on a potential semiconductor proposal. I believe something was kind of fleshed out yesterday, but it would be interesting for an update from your perspective for the membership.
No, that's great. Thanks very much, everybody. One thing definitely emphasize on the top end of mine, as well as I'll finish with it, is this grassroots effort. And the reason we're doing these calls is the communication. We really need and really want you to be involved in this legislative process. So when we're sending out these alerts or giving you a heads up on what's really important for the league as it relates to our priorities as an organization, as well as yours, you really do need to take advantage of the opportunity to reach out to your legislators, to take the opportunity to testify or submit comments and things of that nature on these bills. It really does help with our efforts physically in Salem. So for the semiconductor package, this has been a long-term effort that really kind of goes back to the work that Governor Brown started with the semiconductor task force, the recommendations that came out of that, the work from our congressional delegation that really were instrumental in developing the CHIPS Act, and then ultimately this joint committee on semiconductors that the legislature formed in advance of the session. The reason why it's critical for everybody out there is this presents us with a generational investment to be able to really put a stake out for Oregon's semiconductor industry, which has certainly been leading not just the nation, but leading the world in R&D, chip development, et cetera, et cetera. And with the amount of money that's available within the CHIPS Act, it's $52 million, or excuse me, 52 billion with a B, available out there. Oregon is going to be competing against about 38 other states. And every one of those other states are going to have a competitive package. And what the communication is this week for you, now is your time to be reaching out to your elected officials. They need, the message is pretty clear, the message is pretty clear for you to be able to relay to them. They need to be contacting their leadership, and that means the House Speaker, that means the Senate President. And the message is pretty simple. We need to make sure that this semiconductor package has all of the economic incentives in it. And that means these sunset extensions. So that's enterprise zone, it's the SIP gain share program, it's industrial site readiness program, and it's also the R&D tax credit program. Those are all components of putting a package together that will be competitive and will allow Oregon to compete for some of that federal funding in the CHIPS Act. If we don't have those elements in this semiconductor package going forward, or a commitment from our leadership to put it in, we are going to be at a disadvantage and not be able to compete as well as some of these other states that have got more money to put up for site readiness, have a different planning process to actually get sites ready. or are really getting themselves ready to take advantage of this funding that's out there. So part of the semiconductor package that is also important to relay is that the value is not just for one giant 500-acre site. It is literally a statewide value where the funding will be available for smaller, I'll say, semiconductor operations, and some of the existing businesses that are out there, but as well as some of those smaller ones. So this truly is something that has some statewide benefit. I can't tell you what community and things of that nature is going to get the money, because that's not something that is, I'll just say, available right now. But bottom line is, the value for us as an organization is having semiconductor industry really solidify in Oregon's economy. And at this point in time, we've got a shell effectively, and that's in this week's bulletin. It's an LC 4320. It'll turn into a piece of legislation at some point. But based on what we saw earlier this week, those key elements that I mentioned earlier, all of those business incentive packages with sunset extensions needs to really be in this bill. It's really the only way we're going to have a competitive package to demonstrate to Department of Commerce, for example, that Oregon is serious about the funding. Our leadership has gotten us to this point, and we're at a stage on the communication side that they just need to hear that we're supporting efforts to get all of these pieces in this package. And the good news is that the Joint Semiconductor Committee that's out there is virtually unanimous in all of these elements. They really do want to go with a bold package, and they really do want to put something together that is going to be competitive against these other states. So that's the quick message on this. And as Patty said, we're happy to take some questions here at the end.
Jim, is it fair to say this is a starting point, not necessarily an ending point yet?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good characterization. This really is a starting point. I mean, they've got the $210 million in there. It's just a matter of trying to get some clarity on where that funding is going to go, how much goes to site readiness, how much goes to workforce development, university system, et cetera. And I think they're going to try to do their best to try to balance that out. But the key missing elements really come down to those incentive packages for businesses and for the communities that have shown that we've done an excellent job with e-zones, for example, with those investments.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So we're going to go back to Ariel. I think she's got a different platform that she's using, so hopefully we'll be able to hear her a little bit better. So Ariel, if you are on the line still, if you don't mind just starting fresh again and explaining the 60-day package, that I think would be most helpful, because I do think there was a significant number of members who didn't hear a substantial amount of your initial presentation. Is she on?
Hi, Patty, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Sorry, everyone. Ariel here again. So I was apologize for the technical difficulties. I was giving an update on the 60-day housing package. The main vehicle for that is House Bill 2001, and there are currently -1 amendments posted that are also linked in today's bulletin if you want to read those in detail. But they basically represent a negotiated bipartisan package with support from both the House and the Senate for some key items to move forward on an expedited path. The bill contains, or the amendments contain some focused resources for youth homelessness, for the development of modular housing, for some pre-development funds for affordable housing, and then a negotiated policy between tenant advocates and landlords that would continue some of the eviction protections that were stood up during the pandemic. So that's in that bill. And then the key piece that we've been tracking from LOC is some language from the legislature that recognizes the governor's emergency declaration on homelessness. And then that language extends her emergency declaration to the whole state. So that was an important thing we were looking for and advocating for the 157 cities and 26 counties that were not included in the governor's emergency order. That bill is expected to have a hearing and pass out of the House Housing and Homelessness Committee on Thursday. From there, it will go to the Budget Committee, the Ways and Means Committee. And there we expect to see funding attached to that including $130 million, which is what the governor proposed for her emergency response plan, for her emergency order, and an additional $25 million that would be specifically for the balance of state. That money at this point, my understanding, is intended to go to Oregon Housing and Community Services, the state housing agency, and LOC. We expect to be working closely with them to learn more about how we can make sure those funds are reaching the state. So that's the 60-day housing package moving again on Thursday. Another piece is planning to be added to that that the LOC has been really closely engaged on. That is House Bill 2889, which is also scheduled for a hearing. They had a hearing, yesterday, and is planning to be heard as an amendment to that 60-day package next Thursday to join that 60-day package in House Bill 2001 and move forward. So what is in that bill 2889 currently is what's known as the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. This is a bill that primarily impacts cities with a population of 10,000 and above. It's a continuation of some of the legislation that passed in 2019 that requires cities at that population to do regular housing capacity analyses to plan for needed housing and do a new requirement called the Housing Production Strategy. This bill 2889 takes the next step. It's directing the state to start calculating, doing more of the analytical work that cities used to do, and actually producing housing targets, or actually numerical goals for numbers of homes that cities should be planning for, including at various affordability levels. It also includes some equity considerations that the state wants to start tracking, and puts cities on a regular review with the state. So LOC has been closely negotiating this bill along with other stakeholders, and it is on a very quick path. And we are looking for an additional round of amendments to come forward probably today to be finalized next week. And at this point, we're really immersed in the details of that policy, but do expect that to be moving forward, again, with full bipartisan support with the 60-day package. So I'm happy to take any questions when we get to that point, but those are my two main updates for today. And thanks again for the patience with the technical difficulties.
And thank you, Ariel. And just out of curiosity, you said both bills have bipartisan support in the House and Senate. Are we expecting the governor to be supportive as well, or is that too early to tell?
My understanding is that she's been a part of the conversations, or her office has been in some way. I haven't seen anything official on her position.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes kind of the update from the LOC lobbyists. We've got about 32 minutes, if my clock on my computer is correct, for some questions and answers. So what I would like to do before we get to that is we did have two lobbyists who are on staff who did not present today. Michael Martin handles our water, wastewater, solid waste, and natural resources portfolio. So if you have any questions related to that, please know that you can reach out to him directly. Jim, if Michael's not online, if you could drop his email in the chat, that would be great. And then Scott Winkles handles our general governance portfolio. So things like public records, ethics, public safety, public infrastructure, that would be Scott. And you can contact him if you have any questions about bills related to those. Moving to the actual question portion of the day, if you have any questions, there's two ways to do it. You can either raise your proverbial Zoom hand, or you can put the question in the chat. I would just remind everybody that this is an opportunity for questions. It's not an opportunity for comment. We want to make sure that people who have questions can actually get them answered. And in line with that, we would ask that you limit yourself to one question at a time so anybody who has one can ask. So if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat, and LOC staff will call on you as we determine who's got questions that need answering. Any questions? It looks like Mayor Cross, do I see your hand up? You want to unmute yourself and ask?
So this is for Jim McCauley on the economic incentives, the SIP and such. Are those going into this bill? Are those only going to be applied to the semiconductor, or is that for any industry?
Great question. So the reason for getting these incentive packages built into the semiconductor package is to make sure that when Commerce looks at an application from the state of Oregon, for example, they'll know that there are a number of other business incentives. It's part of how they're going to basically rate these applications that will be coming from the business industry. So the E-zones, for example, apply to a whole mix of business opportunities, not just semiconductor. The same is true for really the SIP gain share portion as well. Those have applied to anything from, I'll say, Intel facilities to wind farms to other major, I'll say, manufacturing footprints that are out there that are literally in the billions of dollars. So those are really kind of on the mega side of projects. And then when you look at the research and development tax credit, that is really a key component that is important to have as part of the semiconductor package, because that's really the how Commerce will be evaluating it. So those states that have got an R&D tax credit in it will be effectively, I'll say, bumped up in the queue and be evaluated at a much higher level than other states. That's been a pretty clear message here from Commerce and certainly our congressional delegation.
Thank you, Jim.
I'm going to move. Mayor McCardle had a question in the chat regarding House Bill 2889. Mayor McCardle of Independence would like to know more about what requirements there will be for housing production. Are there resources? How will decisions be made? And what type of local input is there going to be? And I think, Ariel, that would be for you if you have a chance.
Thanks, Mayor, for that question. So the housing production strategy is a requirement that's already in statute. It's something that a city will have to do within a year of updating their housing capacity analysis. And it is intended to be locally driven through local public process. And cities are basically required to consider a range of tools that they feel will help encourage the development of needed housing. And that is defined in the bill. And it's really a focus on both affordable, publicly supported housing, as well as housing that's not being built at market, moderate income, or workforce housing, usually defined it as affordable at 120% of median family income and below. And we've, and as part of that requirement, the state does fund that work. So cities, DLCD in their previous budget, for cities that are currently on the schedule doing housing production strategies right now, and for the next biennium, they have in their governor's recommended budget funding for planning grants to support cities, both for doing that housing capacity analysis, the more technical work, and for doing the housing production strategy. So what this new bill does is it actually gives DLCD a little bit more authority to review and kind of vet those strategies and have a conversation with the city to say, hey, we think you could be taking stronger steps, but the real enforcement pieces don't actually kick in until later. There's going to be, part of the bill stands up a public-facing dashboard that will be supported by Oregon Housing Community Services and the state to kind of show both what the targets are in terms of the numbers of units that are needed in every city, as well as what the housing production strategies are. And so in that review period after a housing production strategy, the process starts with a conversation or kind of a collaborative audit with the state and the city, if any city is seeing an underproduction compared to their target goals, and we expect that all cities will for the near future due to all of the numerous market and realities out there, scarcity of housing. So a big focus of our work on this bill is to ensure that the legislation and the accountability structure is recognizing the difference between a city that's working really hard, trying all sorts of strategies and still staying under production, what's in the control of the city versus what's outside the control of the city, right? So those enforcement mechanisms are intended to distinguish between cities really working and cities who are not complying, which we fully expect to be the minority. The other piece of this legislation is DLC is directed to identify state resources to help cities meet their goals. So that will include potentially, infrastructure, technical assistance, code assistance, whatever, through that conversation with each individual city, whatever they are sharing as their barriers. The idea and the hope is that state resources will be prioritized to help them encourage the development of housing.
Thank you, Ariel. I've got another question, and I believe it's for you as well. Is the $130 million, that's part of that 60-day package, is it strictly for housing or also for shelter projects?
So it's really focused on shelter. The governor's recommended budget and the governor's proposal is really focused on some specific strategies around both building more shelter beds, but also rapid rehousing services, but really focused on addressing unsheltered homelessness.
Thank you,
There's,
Ariel.
yeah.
Sorry. If you have more, I thought I just heard you pause, so I interrupted. If you've got more, keep going.
I was just going to say that the other components in that package in the bill in 2001, there's some other funding for housing, but the 130 is specifically for the governor's homeless plan.
Thank you. And then Mayor Walke, and I'm not sure if this is a question for Lindsay or Jim, but there's a question for Mayor Walke of Lincoln City. Is there any chance we'll see lodging tax flexibility being considered during this section?
So thank you for the question. I'd like to give that to Lindsay. That is in her portfolio.
Yeah, I can take that. Great question. I would say, yeah, the best answer I have right now is I don't know. I have met with legislators who are supportive. I think, yeah, I have to figure it out. And that's truly the best answer that I have to give right now. At this point, there is no bill to change the flexibility. I have heard that one senator has a legislative concept that they haven't dropped yet to do that. So I have a meeting with them next week. And I don't want to say who because their bill isn't public yet. But it's a top priority. It's on my list and I'm meeting with as many legislators as I can to try to push it forward.
Thank you, Lindsay.
One thing, hang
go
on
ahead,
just a
Jim.
second. One thing that would be helpful is for anybody who shares this as a top priority, which we know many of our communities on the coast and other tourist dependent cities do, reach out to your legislators, let them know it's important, and that'll really help Lindsay out with getting some support and endorsements on this.
Yes, yeah, please reach out to your legislators if lodging tax flexibility is important to you, and then also drop me an email to let me know that you did that as well.
Wonderful. We have another question from Kirby. He's the city administrator for the city of Hines. Ariel, this is back to you. How will House Bill 2889 affect cities with populations under 10,000?
That's a great question. So it won't affect them immediately or have a direct impact. That said, in some of the previous legislation that kind of got us to this point, DLCD was really intentional to make sure that any resources directed around these efforts are also eligible for smaller cities under 10,000. We had at least a couple cities under 10,000 that opted in to do their own housing production strategies, even though they're not mandated in the legislation. That was Hood River and I believe Madras were two that did an early housing production strategy to kind of pilot this with DLCD. And the department's intention is that the resources will be available if smaller cities want to do this type of work. You just won't be, you're not going to be held to the same standards. And we advocated really strongly earlier this week as well. DLCD's initial public hearing on their budget was on Tuesday, and there was some really strong advocacy to ensure that small city planning grants generally and housing planning work generally will continue to be funded and supported at DLCD.
Thank you. So we did have a question. I'm going to keep moving. And again, we try to do city officials first since that's our primary membership. I did have a question from Cresswell. Is there any update on House Bill 3125 regarding providing funding to assist with utility bill payments? Michael, I think I saw you online and that's your bill. Can you give an update, please?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We had a hearing on the ratepayer assistance bill earlier this week. And I want to thank everybody who took time to write a letter of support, submit that, reach out to your legislators. I have not heard from the chair or vice chair of the water committee on when there'll be a vote scheduled for that bill, but I will keep you updated on that. And again, just thank you for your advocacy. It's incredibly important to reach out to your legislators and ensure these bills get pushed through the process. Thanks.
Thank you, Mile. I've got a question from Depot Bay, Rick Beasley. Can you comment on House Bill 2101 regarding withholding of revenue sharing for cities that have failed to file required financials under ORS 927? Is that you, Lindsay?
This would actually be me. I'm not
Okay.
sure, Rick, if your question is accurately citing the House bill. So 2101 is related to basically pass-through funds, fund exchange program with ODOT. Did you intend on a different bill?
Jim, this is Rick Beasley. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought it was 2101 or 2110. It deals with ORS 927.
There's another note in the chat, Jen,
Hi.
from Kim that says House Bill 2110.
Okay.
I believe this is one of Scott's bills, and he was not able to make the meeting today due to a family event.
So Rick, what we'll do is we'll forward the question to Scott, and we will make sure that we provide a quick update on it next week, and we'll have Scott email you directly, Rick, with an update. But if anyone else has an interest, we can give an update early next week.
Thank you. I apologize for getting that number wrong. Thank you very much.
No problem. We still have about a little less than 20 minutes. If there are other questions, you can continue to drop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Let me know. Anybody? Okay.
Hey,
I'll-
Patty,
yes.
could I make a quick note just because this was a development this morning? I know folks have concerns about House Bill 2816. This morning, it was actually officially posted for a public hearing for next Wednesday, the 22nd at 3 p.m. So I do just want to flag that for folks. If there are, I know there's some folks who have concerns, some who don't, but I did just want to make sure to flag that while we have this opportunity today.
And Nolan, because not everybody on the call may know bill numbers the way you do, can you tell us what that bill actually does?
Thanks for reminding me about that. Yeah, so this is the high energy use facility bill that attempts to regulate high use energy facilities specifically designed and focused for data centers and cryptocurrency centers. There's been a lot of conversation. An amendment has been drafted that really relieves our greatest concerns. I've also followed up on some additional concerns about current projects that are being built that would help to provide energy to these facilities like biomass energy producing facilities. Those would be allowed as renewable energy sources according to Oregon's renewable portfolio standards, and therefore would be allowed under this bill. So based on that, the league would actually move to neutral on this bill, but I do plan to continue to highlight the concerns that I know some cities do have within my testimony. And of course, you all are welcome to submit testimony or sign up for testimony next week.
Excellent. Thank you, Nolan. I appreciate that. I do see Councilor Hall, you have your hand up from Haynes.
Yes, I just want to see if there's anything going on in the legislature about water supply issues in Central Oregon, because they're getting a drought issue over there in Crook County.
So I believe that would be Michael with the water portfolio. Anything of interest or note that you can share with Councilor Hall and the rest of the membership?
More generally, happy to talk upline. I'd actually just heard today from Representative Helms' office. He is chair of the Water Ag Natural Resources Committee, that there's a drought package that's being discussed, and I asked for an update on that, and they're likely to have one next week, which might have components of what you're specifically talking about, and happy to talk in more detail offline. I just heard that this afternoon or this morning.
Thank you, Michael. And Councilor Hall, just so you know, Michael did drop his contact information in the chat if you do need to reach him offline or anyone else. Any other questions today? I think I saw something from Mayor Cross of Toledo. Question for you, Ariel. Is there any movement or update on the Oregon Mayors Association's proposal for direct funding to every city for homelessness response and prevention?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mayor Cross. So, with the emergency budget package, the mayor's proposal is really a long-term proposal, so it was difficult to kind of pivot, and that emergency 60-day package has been a very behind closed door legislator conversation. So right now, we're working on getting a table set with our partners at the counties and community action agencies with the legislature to talk about the long-term budget discussion and how cities' needs can be met. I think it's unlikely that we're going to get everything we asked for in that proposal. It's rare to see that in a first-time legislative proposal, but our priority remains strong for direct funding to as many cities as possible for the needs that cities are experiencing. So working on making that conversation happen. Some of the feedback we've heard initially is that legislators really want to make sure that funding this session is that it's being done collaboratively at the local level. Obviously, that's what cities are doing, but I think it's important that when we have that legislative conversation, we have to be arm in arm with our county and provider partners. So that's going to be key to that discussion. Patty, I also saw a question about wetlands in the chat. Do you want me to take that one too?
Yes, if you can. It's from Kelly Hart, and I apologize, Kelly. I don't know if you have a title, so but she does ask if there's any bills related to wetlands or wetland mitigation.
Sure. So there's nothing that is currently moving right now, but there are a couple bills in the mix. There was a bill introduced that would kind of put some further restrictions on how the Department of State Lands requires enhancement of wetlands for removal of fill violations. We've seen bills like this every session. They rarely get hearings. I do know that the city of Halsey, the recorder there, is always working behind the scenes and with her delegation to get some conversations started about wetlands mitigation. And I think she may have been working on some legislation, and we can try and get an update. If you want to email me, I can get you more details on that. I also know that the Department of State Lands may have a bill, I'm not sure where it's at, that would update their fees for wetlands mitigation. Currently, their fees are set in statute. That means that they're a little outdated in terms of the department's needs. They want to put those fees into rulemaking and then probably raise them significantly, which obviously would have significant impacts for development. So that's something we'll be tracking very closely. And if and when we see any movement on that, I'll be letting you all know so you can engage if you're interested. But feel free to reach out to me to talk about more of these in more detail.
Thank you, Ariel. And then we have a question from Mayor Beatty of Milwaukee. She asks, is there anything going on about trying to heighten rail safety regulation? The incident in Ohio is the latest example of railroad safety concerns. There was some work done back in 2017 and 2019, and she's wondering if there's any action this session. Jim, is that you with the transportation portfolio?
Yes, it is. Good question. I don't know the specifics, but there's actually a couple of rail bills out there within the Joint Committee on Transportation. And that's where they would go. And I can get back to you. I think it's probably the best option I can have at this point in time. I haven't seen anything emerge yet in a hearing, although I was conversation in the Capitol earlier this week is that there was going to be something coming forward here within the next couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Any other questions? We still have about 10 minutes left to take any. If I'm not seeing any, I'll give people a few more minutes to put in the chat and just give a quick update so everybody knows. First, our communications director did just advise that the bulletin has been released. It should be in your email inboxes now. There'll be more substantive and informative details about the bills we updated you on in that bulletin. If you're not yet signed up to receive the bulletin, please feel free to contact anybody whose information was in the chat, and we can make sure we get you signed up in the future. Additionally, just for those of you who are interested, this coming Wednesday, registration will open for the LOC Spring Conference. We're going to hold that conference in Seaside at the city's convention center between April 25th and 26th. Our spring conference does tend to be a little bit smaller, which means we have less space. So we do expect those spots to go quickly. If you're interested in it, I would encourage you to register sooner rather than later. Additionally, we're going to be providing training on Public Budgeting 101 that's intended for city council members as well as any member of your budget committee. We have virtual training that we will be providing both during the day and at night. The first will be on March 7th from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. in recognition of those people who are not getting paid for their volunteer service and have day jobs. The second will be on Wednesday, March 8th from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. in case that's more convenient for others. You can register on LOC's website now. The cost per person is $79, but if one city sends at least 6 members, so if you would do your full budget committee or your full council, it would only be $395 for all 6 people. And then last but certainly not least, LOC's president and current Hillsborough Mayor Steve Calloway is hosting a series of regional meetings across the state between now and May. Those regional meetings will run from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Lunch is being provided by the league, so we do encourage everybody to attend. A full list of those dates and locations are located on LOC's website. The first 2 did happen already this past week. Thank you to Mayor Cross for hosting in Toledo. And while I don't see Mayor Joe Bonetti of Coos Bay, thank you to him and his city for hosting yesterday. I'm not seeing any final questions in the chat, although Mayor Wright of Seaside does say that he hopes all of you will join him in Seaside for our conference in April. Thank you. We will be back again next Friday at noon for another legislative update. As always, please follow us at www.orcities.org and we'll keep you apprised of what you need to know and what's happening in the Capitol. Thanks, everybody.